All right, so right now I want to talk about cameras, but before we talk about animating them and adding that sort of extra level of dynamics and life to your animation, we need to talk about what the heck they are and what's going on with some of the technical underbelly of them. So when we're navigating in here, we hit the space bar and we can get our 4 views. I should probably put something in here so we can see what is going on. There we go. All right, so just a little something to catch the light, not properly modeled, as you can see. So when we are moving around in here, we have our different views that we can get to, and you hover over one, and you're looking at it this way. These are cameras. They're cameras that you can't physically see. You're not going to spin this camera around and find the top view. It's been made invisible. They are in the outliner though. So they will show up in here and you can click on them there and you'll see that their visibility is turned off. Now, I highly, highly recommend never selecting these, never touching them, never messing with them, especially your orthographic views, which are really important and they have different settings, which allows you to have that sort of weird, here we go, view where you can't see depth. So if I go just up here with my perspective camera, this one is bigger than this one, right? Because it's closer to the camera. But if we go to the top view, they look exactly the same. And that's because there's no depth of field, there's no vanishing point, there's no third axis. This is basically like a camera that cannot exist in real life, whereas the perspective camera could definitely exist in real life. So we don't want to mess with those settings. But once you start adding cameras, well, those settings you could mess with if you'd like. And so cameras are under Create, Cameras. We're going to stick with just regular camera. There are ones that have aims on them. There's one that are told to always be pointed up. There's stereo cameras. There's all sorts of crazy stuff you can do in here, but we're going to stick with the basic, just a camera. And it looks like this. It is something that has a transform node. It has a shape node, but it has no shape that's visible. You're never going to apply a material to it. So you're never going to be able to render this. It's just going to always, have the locator information, the transform information, but never any visual information. Now, the difference between this and most of the other things that you would put in here is that you can look through this view. So I can call this main camera. And through panels, perspective, main camera, I can look through this and find the stuff. There we go. So I can tell this to where it should be pointing. I can frame up a shot, for example. So a few notes about what's going on here. Every time I'm navigating when I'm in this camera, I am changing where it is. If I go to this to view, and then there's the camera. Okay. Oh, that's silly. There it is. So watch what happens when I start navigating in here. It's moving around. It doesn't update live. It waits till I'm like done figuring out what I want. And you can see how much it's swinging around. And that's something that we haven't really talked about yet, is that when you're doing this, the camera is moving wildly. And there we go. And right now it's not undoable. I hit undo. It undid the fact that I named this, but it doesn't undo the fact that there's motion. We can change that if we want to. But for right now, we're just going to stick with the other options. So you need to make sure that once you start animating it, there's certain precautions you have to take, including maybe locking it down, things like that. Also, there are all manner of camera settings. So if you know your cameras, the focal length, the focus distance, apertures, all these kinds of things. There we go. I'm basically going to more of a telephoto lens now versus a wide angle lens, right? So the camera hasn't moved. I've just changed the focal length of the lens on here, which means if I get close, you can see there's a lot of distortion because this is a really, really small focal length. Whereas if I zoom in right here, there's no distortion, but you will have no depth of, you will have extra depth of field, I should say. 35, I think, is the default. So changing the focal length will change other things that you maybe can't see right now because we're not dealing with blurring and in depth of field and everything. Same with things like f-stop. This is not going to change anything right now because you have no light coming in. Like we're not looking at any renders. Once you get to renders, that's a different story. So be careful with what you're tinkering in with here. If you're not familiar with actual physical cameras, maybe stay away from it until you've done a little bit of research. If you were to Google search for Autodesk Maya camera, you'll get the main page on Maya's knowledge network or Autodesk's knowledge network, how to create a camera, but it also has something about its attributes. So you can click on that and you can see a whole bunch of different definitions for what's going on in here. And like, here's a picture that includes depth of field. So you can get kind of a little bit more information about the different settings that are in here. So there's lots of different links in here for what you're doing. This is about general cameras. Yeah, focus and blur. So there's information on here for terminology if you're not already familiar with it. We're not going to be dealing too much with this in class. We're going to be, we'll make cameras and we'll animate them. We're going to leave them at the default settings because honestly, the default settings serve our purposes perfectly well. We don't want to add more complicating factors right now to things. You will notice that all of these are technically keyable. Well, we're going to stay away from that, right? We want to keep things a little bit more simple, but if you did want to do like a rack focus kind of technical thing, you could do that. Or that I think that push pull where you move the camera in but you change the focal length so the you know subject stays in the same area. You can do those things. But again, we're going to stick away from it. For those of you that are into photography, those are your settings. You have to select your camera in order to get them. You can also see them in the attribute editor, along with some others that are not listed in the technical in this area here. These are the keyable things. If you go to the attribute editor, you get all the rest. But your cameras will all show up under panels, perspective, and then any other cameras that are here, assuming they're all perspective cameras, which why wouldn't they be? They're going to be coming in through this way, so you can change your view. You do have to make sure you're kind of paying attention to this. And make sure that you're looking at the right camera, but also that you have the correct camera selected, because that's what's going to get keyed. That's what's going to get, that's the attributes you're going to change. All right, so, and then you can navigate through this the same way, spacebar to go to this one, spacebar to get back out. If you want your 4 view back, you have to go to this one, and it'll automatically go back to the perspective camera, which you could change to your main camera if you wanted to. And then from here on out, your 4 view would be these 4 cameras instead.